are here on our own with our esteemed colleague out for the day. So we'll start with our first agenda item, and Mike Gridley is joining us.
Thank you. I am here to tell you about a proposal to convey right-of-way along Government Way from the city of Coeur d'Alene to Lakes Highway District, Dalton Garden, and Hayden. And I've got an aerial photograph. This is property that has been acquired as part of the next phase of the Government Way improvement project that will go from Hanley to Prairie Avenue. And Coeur d'Alene is on the west side of Government Way. These other jurisdictions are on the east side, but Coeur d'Alene was the sponsor of the project and has kind of, or has been responsible for the leadership acquiring the property and will be responsible for bidding the project. So as part of that responsibility, for fulfilling that responsibility, we acquired properties that are actually outside our city limits and in these other jurisdictions. So we need to transfer those properties to those entities. The money that was used to buy these is money that came through the federal government, and so it's not Coeur d'Alene's money. To the extent there's a match, the other partners, Lakes, Hayden, and Dalton Gardens, they pay their portion of any match. So there's no real net effect, financial effect to the city.
Great. Any questions?
I only had one question. It seems like we were talking about similar situation that had by us doing this, relieved some lien issues with the mall and some of their developer owners. Is this the same stretch of property?
It is on the other side of the street. So the mall is down here on Hanley. This is the mall area. And the last bit of right-of-way to be acquired is along the mall's property. And it's been something we've worked out with them basically, but because of the number of lessees, people who have leased space, and they have an interest in the common parking area, and it's just kind of a complicated thing. Everybody's in agreement, but getting it across the goal line has been a bit of a challenge. But it doesn't really involve this transaction.
And so approving this doesn't hamper or affect that in any way?
No, okay. No, this just moves the ball closer for the project to finally go to bid and then be completed.
Good. I don't have anything else.
Okay.
So then I'd make a motion that we approve a declaration of no value and convey the right-of-way along Government Way to the Lakes Highway District and the cities of Hayden and Dalton Gardens.
Second. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye. Both of us.
All right. Item number 2 on the agenda is going to be presented by our Planning Director, Hillary Anderson.
Good afternoon, council members Miller and Evans. Let me open up my PowerPoint. All right, so the item before you is a request from the Planning Department and other staff members and other departments to repeal the city's existing Pocket Residential Development Ordinance, which is also commonly referred to as pocket housing in the city. I'll give you a little bit of history on this. So the ordinance was drafted in 2007, and it was adopted the same year. It replaced what was previously the cluster housing ordinance that also had some problems. And it allows for this pocket residential type of housing to be within the R8, R12, R17, C17, and C17L zoning districts. And so it's allowing for a variety of smaller types of housing to fit within the city. And as I go through the presentation, I'll tell you some of the issues that staff has identified and let you know what we're proposing. So the purpose of this ordinance, the Pocket Residential Development, the ordinance that's currently in place, was to encourage greater efficiency of land use by allowing compact infill development on aggregate sites. to stimulate new housing that is compatible in scale and character with established surrounding residential areas, to produce a broader range of building forms for residential development, expand opportunities for home ownership, including condominium and fee simple, and lastly, to ensure that the residents of the pocket housing enjoy a high-quality environment with permanence, stability, and access to green space. So I'll show you a few of the images from our handout that we hand out to the community. It's available on the website, showing what was the intent of pocket housing. And so you can see there are kind of some smaller homes, a variety of architectural styles. These ones kind of look more like cottages. They have the porches in the front, the smaller open rail fencing. Here's some additional styles. The garage is tucked back. There's a nice pergola here. A variety of siding types, articulation in the roof line. Here's some nice materials, and these are excerpts from that handout showing the acceptable siding types, which listed brick, cedar shake, and traditional lap siding. And here again is kind of the intent of the homes, allowing for a variety of housing types. It allows for single-family as well as multifamily units, but again, you can see how they were designed to look like existing homes in the city of Coeur d'Alene. So kind of the long story short, not all pocket housing is created equally. And so we have, since 2007, seen a wide variety of pocket housing. Some have been high quality and have fit well within the residential areas, and others have not been as high quality and don't provide that level of high quality open space. The siding materials, the architectural standards, all of that has been lacking to some degree, as well as just how the homes have been grouped together, kind of isolated from surrounding residential uses. And I will walk you through some photos showing that as well, but first I will tell you of the 22 items. I'll kind of list off some of those. And these are the concerns that were identified by staff from all of the different city departments that participate in our weekly development review team meetings. So the majority of the pocket housing projects in the city are not infill, which infill was the intent of the ordinance. Many of them are built in what we call greenfield areas, so outside of kind of the more urban and developed area of the city. They're on raw dirt is where a lot of them are taking place. The ordinance allows pocket housing projects, there's no minimum size, but it allows them up to 5 acres in size. Our planned unit development threshold, the minimum is 1.5 acres, and so there's this big overlap of the two, and so the 5 acres is not really an infill type of project, and I'll show you examples of that. So one thought is the minimum size needs to be evaluated as well. So we want to have a minimum threshold as well as the maximum should be a lot less. Should probably be 1.5 acres so that it's not overlapping with a PUD project. Some staff feels that the pocket housing ordinance has undone everything in the subdivision code. We have challenges with how the houses are off of driveways that become more of private streets, but they're dead ends, which is a challenge for water, wastewater, and the fire departments. There's also a concern with many of them having private streets versus being public. And so the maintenance of that, it becomes a long-term challenge for those homeowners in the future, and complaints for the city. Addressing is often an issue for pocket housing projects just because they are more internal off of private driveways sometimes. It's a challenge for building department as well as emergency services in terms of how they're addressed. Open space is less than what's required for PUD projects, and the open space can even be a private yard. So staff doesn't believe that that's appropriate for a pocket housing project that's supposed to have high quality open space. It shouldn't be able to be doubled as your courtyard in your own private yard. And qualifying, oh, I already mentioned that one. And also in terms of how the open space has been improved is widely varies between pocket housing projects in the city. There is a maximum lot coverage of 50%. Some staff thinks we should evaluate that as well and maybe lessen that for projects to make sure there's adequate stormwater runoff and also so the houses aren't occupying the entire lot. Setback requirements is an interesting thing. There's no requirement for internal setbacks, so there's no requirement between residences. And that's been an issue even for some PUD projects this year. We have some homes that are 5 feet apart. And with the quantity of snowfall we've received, that has been a challenge, and we want to look at that actually for both PUD projects, as well as it is definitely a concern for pocket housing if there's no minimum setbacks. Just as a side note, for the subdivision code, generally it's supposed to be 15 feet between houses, so anything less than that, which is allowed with pocket housing or PUD projects, can be a challenge. There's no minimum lot sizes for lots, so if they are individually platted and sold off, there's no minimum, which is great for some things, but not so great for others. The alley, there's a requirement now that if there is an alley, that the project's supposed to come off of the alley, and that's sometimes doesn't make sense, so allowing flexibility for that. There is an allowance for shared parking, and that often, especially in the larger pocket housing projects, creates apartment-style parking, which is just a large surface parking lot, again, not very compatible with the adjacent residential uses, which pocket housing is supposed to do. Gated entrances have occurred in some of these projects, and that has been a concern of staff and a challenge in how they are being gated. I already mentioned the concerns of the water and fire departments with the dead-end streets and the length of the infrastructure. There's also the design standards. It looks like there was an omission in here that should have been included. It restricts T111 siding and metal siding in the R8 and R12 zoning districts. But it doesn't restrict T111 in the R17, C17, or C17L zones, and it doesn't have any restriction of vinyl siding. So that's kind of a concern if we're trying to have higher quality siding on these pocket housing projects so that they fit with the surrounding uses. And lastly, there's nothing in there requiring that front doors are visible from the streets or private driveways, which is not only from the design standpoint, but it's kind of a concern for emergency services if it's not clear where the front doors are located. So I'll walk you through some photos showing you the wide variety of pocket housing. So the first few slides are on the design, layout, and materials. So this one is off of Martin Lane, and this is one of our larger ones. I believe there's 21 or 22 units in this. The front doors are not visible. These are ones where they're off to the sides, and every single unit looks identical. This is a long dead-end street, and you'll see photos of that later, that basically there's one turnaround for fire that's also where they have all of the garbage cans located. There's another view of kind of that, just a long strip of driveway. These are the rear yards that are, it's unclear if they were supposed to be open space or just the rear yards and how they kind of interface with the neighbors, no man's land. These are some other ones closer off of 15th Street, two different ones adjacent to each other. And this we lovingly call the snout houses in the planning world, where the garage is the most prominent feature of the house. So it's fine in some applications, but if you are supposed to be compatible with existing residential uses, our thought is that it should look more similar to the homes that are already there. And then these ones are a little bit different types of materials used. You can see some of the metal overhanging the porch. Here's another kind of side view showing these. The open space areas are really just the green lawn. Here's some other ones where it's, you know, the driveways are right next to each other. There's no sidewall articulation on any of the structures, so they're just more of the box type design. It appears it's vinyl siding on both of these structures. Here's some off of Davidson. These ones are a newer pocket housing project, and so there are 4 units off of this particular driveway. This is one where it was a little tricky for the city in terms of the water and wastewater access and how that was done within a private driveway, as well as the addressing.
Apparently they have wastewater on the sidewalk there.
This is one in Fort Grounds neighborhood. This is off of the Lakeshore Drive, and this one has the higher quality siding for sure and more articulation going on in the design. It has, the setback is quite close to the street, and as I'm sure the council members are aware and others in the community, this was the impetus for Fort Grounds coming forward and requesting that special use permit to restrict the neighborhood to only single-family development, because these are, in essence, multifamily. These are ones, some of the first ones, I think 2008 was when these were developed, at least the first ones over here, on Government Way across from the cemetery. And then another developer came in and did some other ones further south, kind of more the skinny home style. So I'll show you some of the views showing the parking access and trash concerns with some of the pocket housing projects. So this is the one off Martin Lane, again, just to show you how this is the fire can turnaround here, but this is where they have their trash enclosures, very limited landscaping. Here's another just shared driveway, which can work well in some instances and others not as well, the garbage out on the street. These are some of the gates that I mentioned that are of concern, where it's just a chain across the street. Another gate, this one was approved through fire department, but didn't get vetted through other departments, and there are some challenges with the access off of the major collector street to the side. Some other gates. Another example of kind of a more common or a more shared parking area with all the trash combined. Here's some inherent conflicts with the access and circulation off of this project. And this one is off of the Government Way. So this one is more of an alley. It's a dead-end alley, but it does have more for turnaround and some landscaping at the rear. And lastly, I'll show you some open space examples. So again, as I mentioned, the ordinance allows for yards and front areas to be open space. So in some cases, it is green and improved like this. Other times, it's not. For example, this one. The other thing, as I mentioned, it could be private yards. So this is the one in the Fort Grounds neighborhood where this qualifies as open space. The patio, hard surface, the stones in the rear. And this was grass at one point, but now is AstroTurf. So this has been converted. Here's another open space area. So staff is proposing that we repeal the ordinance rather than take a Band-Aid approach. We thought, there are so many concerns identified through the various departments that makes more sense, right? Rather than bringing forward just an amendment to the existing one. We have reached out to the North Idaho Building Contractors Association to get their feedback, and they're supportive of that, but they want us to bring back something that does allow for more of the infill and the urban housing types. And we have been working with a number of the developers to let them get vested under the existing ordinance. So that's why we waited in bringing this forward to City Council. That's why there's the delay. So our proposal is to do just that, to have this repealed if that's the pleasure of the council, and draft a new ordinance with a lot of input from the development community as well as the neighborhood groups to make sure they feel that it's going to be a compatible ordinance. North Idaho Building Contractors Association also had indicated our first proposal was to look at Sandpoint's cottage housing ordinance as a possible model, and they had concerns with that because they thought Sandpoint's a lot smaller community. It didn't really apply to Coeur d'Alene, and so with their direction, we've definitely expanded our search to include more infill housing ordinances from across the country. So that is our desire, is to move forward with this, and I am happy to entertain any questions of the council.
Great, thank you.
Any questions?
I have just a few.
Okay.
We've had a conversation or two about, there's this tiny homes movement across
Yes.
the country. And so going through this, there's a lot of detail in here. We've talked about it a little bit before. It looked like staff was wrestling with, well, here's what's wrong with the ordinance and here's how that should be fixed
Right.
throughout this presentation. But then overall, what your recommendation is to completely start over and address this infill intent
Correct.
to a better degree, taking NIBCA's direction involved. And then that would include this, the tiny home situation as well as.
Correct. One concept is, it's called co-housing, and so that is, some communities have created an ordinance that allows for more of the tiny home kind of communities, so that could be one concept under the infill housing, to see if that would
And so
work.
you're really looking at addressing, upgrading a current ordinance that we have, or creating a brand-new that addresses all of these issues? Pocket homes, the existing PUDs, the overlying zoning corrections that citing wasn't taken care of in this one, and then adding what's new out there in the industry to the new one.
Correct. It would not include PUDs, so this would just be
Okay.
for infill housing. So we would shrink the size, the acreage that's allowed, probably to 1.5 acres is the maximum, and so that PUDs would be the next step up from a pocket housing or infill housing project. But yes, we would include kind of the concept of pocket housing, cottage housing, other urban infill housing types, and possibly the co-housing as well that would address the tiny houses.
And I think NIBCA did have, in one of their comments, or maybe it was staff report, I can't recall, that they were concerned about being able to attract the type of folks who could live in these smaller cluster housing projects, and wanted that addressed more so than what was going on in, say, Sandpoint, right?
Correct, yes, and that's why they suggested more of the urban and infill housing, so that we could attract more of the millennials or the Gen X.
Okay. And then what's the time frame for putting this together? You said you're going to reach out to more community members and builders, and what's a little time frame for doing that?
We already started on drafting, just very preliminary, an ordinance. One thought, and I wanted to get input from the council, was if there's value, and I think there is, in doing maybe a survey, an online survey, to say what are the types of housing that they'd like to build, what would people like in their neighborhoods, what are we missing in terms of housing within the city of Coeur d'Alene, especially for the infill and urban.
And then you could reach out to the Realtors Association with
Yes.
something like that, and
Right.
NIBCA, and all of those folks. And so in the meantime, should we repeal this, then all of the rules that are currently in place are going to protect current projects, but then there wouldn't be any more of these allowed until the new ordinance was in place,
That's correct.
right?
So if they're already vested, if we've helped them get to that point, they could proceed with a pocket housing project. If not, they could either develop under the existing zoning codes. We have a variety of, the PUDs, we have the overlay zoning districts, we have the floor area ratio within some of the urban overlay districts, et cetera.
Okay. I don't have anything else.
No, there certainly is a large list of concerns that need to be evaluated and considered, so I'm definitely in favor of taking a strong look at this.
So then with that, I would make a motion that we repeal the ordinance as recommended by staff. And then I guess we need a direction to staff to move forward with gathering information and creating a new ordinance to be brought forward to council.
Second. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. Thank you, Hillary.
Thank you.
Next up, we have Melissa Tosi, our HR Director, for Personnel Rule Amendment.
Afternoon. So I'm bringing forward a position, Community Development Specialist, that our Municipal Services Director had brought forward last year in the budget process, which council had approved it. So this really is just the formal process of approving the classification, which is all the job duties listed under the position, and then the compensation tied to it. That's the one piece that we have left before we can actually move forward and recruit for the position. So the Community Development Specialist will initially be supervised by our Municipal Services Director. It will be coordinating all the community development block grant projects. And by bringing it in-house, our Municipal Services Director thinks that we could complete the work in about 20 hours per week. So it'd be a self-only benefited position at 20 hours per week. And then she believes that that position would kind of migrate onto our Community Planning Director. I've posted the position. I've had the conversation with Lake City Employees Association, which the position would fall under. They don't have any concerns with the description or the compensation tied to it. The funds will be coming from HUD since the position is specific to CDBG. And so this is just a formal request to approve it under our classification compensation plan. Happy to stand for any questions.
Questions?
This is so interesting with
I
two
know,
people. It's like we're talking to each other here. I had a couple of questions. So if this is tied to the CDBG grant, which we've been getting since '08, and what we're approving now is a 20-hour per week position, that the position will migrate on to the Community Planning Director position. So this is like a part-time position that could in the future become a full-time position?
I think it potentially could, but the work right now needs some time with our municipal services director, since she's been the one that's been kind of overseeing the CDBG. I think it makes more sense as far as the overall duties of the position to fall under planning. So once there's some training involved and she kind of has some hours with the employee, it makes more sense to be in planning than our city clerk office.
Okay, and so then if this position we're approving is tied to the grant, what happens should the grant become substantially lower or not in existence anymore?
Well, there's plenty of funds now, more than enough for the 20 hours a week. So if it was substantially reduced, we would have to look at funding that from the city, or no longer covering the position anymore.
I guess what I'm doing is in my mind saying, you know, it was a contracted piece that was a flat rate per year, regardless of how much time or energy or effort was spent on the grant. And I think that might have been one of the problems that the city had, is the
Right.
city was taking on, you know, more paperwork sometimes than what should have been necessary. And
Sure.
so this was kind of a resolutionary move. But I guess if the grant, there's been years when there's been 2 large pieces awarded out of this grant, so it seems like the amount of work that is allotted during that 20 hours a week all year round would be substantially less. So will those hours remain? Or is it tied to the work on the grant specifically, or will it just be,
is.
here's a 20-hour position, and if there's nothing to do, that person will just be paid 20 hours no matter what?
I'm not as familiar with the grant as our municipal services director, but it's my understanding that those funds are directly related to CDBG. So if there is not enough hours to keep that employee busy, they would have to be reduced. Because
Okay.
you can't just fill the duties with other things for planning or municipal service. It needs to be tied directly to the grant.
Okay,
Yeah.
that makes good sense, thank you. And I know we can do better in letting the community know that these funds are available and have the ability to reach out to some lower income and elderly with some of that grant money. So that, I would hope that this resolves some of that as well. Okay, I didn't have anything else.
Great. Would you like to make a motion?
I would, because I'm here. And I would like to authorize whatever resolution number this is going to be, approving the addition of the city's classification and compensation plan. I don't have a resolution number in my report,
Yeah.
so.
Second. Any further discussion?
Nope.
All in favor? Aye. Motion carries. And that wraps up our General Services Committee meeting today.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.